Hey, this is Cedric, your host of the Bitcoin Matrix podcast. And before we get into today's episode with Mind Over Matter, I want to tell you about our fantastic sponsors. First up, new sponsor, CypherSafe. I hope that you have taken custody of your Bitcoin and gotten it off of your exchange. Now go that extra step and secure your Bitcoin from physical disaster in a single point of failure with a CypherWheel or the new CypherGrid seed storage device. CypherSafe's goal is to provide important tangible security tools for Bitcoin. CypherSafe focuses on securing your Bitcoin with beautiful, elegant, and practical devices. Designed, engineered, and manufactured all in-house. Machined from solid stainless steel, not stamped out. Waterproof, fireproof, rust-proof, Cedric-proof. The CypherWheel is designed to be physically locked with a padlock and comes with a tamper-evident seal, so you can be aware of any attempts to steal your seed words. Keep your sats safe. Go to cyphersafe.io and use the code MATRIX to get 10% off your order. I don't know about you, but between working from home, mandates, lockdowns, I'm thinking about adding an extra room at the house and/or getting a place to escape or retreat. Citadel Cabins is in the custom building industry, and they are famous for small log cabins that can be shipped anywhere and easily assembled in just a few days without any specialized skills or power tools required. Imagine adding a room to the crib or dropping a cabin in the woods. As we descend deeper and deeper into clown world, the cabins are creating way for families to escape and establish KYC-free location sovereignty, surrounded by people who care about freedom as much as we do. Or maybe you want to get off the grid completely. If you are a landowner, investor, renter, or you want to provide support via your labor or expertise, Citadel Cabins has a program that's right for you. Citadel Cabins is a Bitcoin-only company that exists to help individuals achieve shelter, rest, security, and location independence. Head over to citadelcabins.com now for more information and to fill out an application. Ledin offers interest-bearing savings accounts and Bitcoin-backed loans with the best rates in the entire industry, enabling users to access dollars or additional Bitcoin without needing to sell your existing holdings. Sign up at start.ledn.io/Bitcoin Matrix and get $50 in USDC when you become a Ledin user and take out your first Ledin loan. Bitcoin 2022 will be held on Miami Beach from April 6th to 9th. The Bitcoin conference is going to be a celebration of Bitcoin, Bitcoiners, and this amazing movement that is going to make the world a better place. This is already a can't-miss event with all your favorite Bitcoiners in an amazing environment to chill, party, and learn. Prices are only going to go up, and they are eventually going to sell out. All tickets are transferrable and 100% refundable if you are unable to travel due to COVID restrictions. So if you haven't secured your tickets, use the code Bitcoin Matrix for 10% off at b.tc/conference. And now, let's enter the Bitcoin Matrix for this trigger-filled episode with Mind Over Matter as we discuss mind, body, spirituality, and soul over flesh.
What is real? How do you define real?
You can't jump into cash. Cash is trash. What do? You get out.
Mind Over Matter, also known as Raw Egg Nationalism, is an anonymous Twitter account creating awareness for body, mind, and spirit building. Mind Over Matter, welcome to the Bitcoin Matrix podcast. How are you?
Never been better. Thanks for having me on, Cedric.
Yeah, man. It's great to get together. Your account, I kind of came across this year. It's kind of new to me. It's been kind of one of the most interesting accounts that I've come across all year as well. And I've dipped into some of your Twitter spaces, and they seem to have the most dynamic conversations, controversial topics, interesting point of views, and even some conflict. So I really just wanted to get together for a chat and see where it went. So I'd love to learn a little bit about you, like maybe how'd you come to Twitter? Where'd you kind of get the idea for the account and what you're trying to do?
Yeah, sure. Great question. So I just kind of backing up a little bit. I kind of got into Bitcoin in 2017, right? So when a lot of people did, obviously, you have this massive run up, and like around, I guess it was like June or so that year, I started kind of looking more into it. Kind of did what most people did back then: download Coinbase, bought Bitcoin, Litecoin, whatever,
Same
just
here.
kind of like I don't know what's going on back then. I'm just like, oh, this Bitcoin thing sounds cool, but like Litecoin's cheaper. Let me get some of that too. So that's kind of broadly kind of where I got into to Bitcoin. But I actually have been in like the aesthetics movement and like bodybuilding, on Twitter since around 2016, 2017. But I've been lifting pretty much my whole adult life, so over a decade. And what got me to finally kind of make an account was I finally kind of felt like, maybe it's time to kind of synthesize the aesthetics movement with, a lot of stuff in Bitcoin, with a lot of the mindset stuff. So I think that's kind of where I got the idea. So I've kind of been around on different like anonymous Twitter accounts prior to the one I have currently, but never really went like fully kind of public like I have with this one. But yeah, that was kind of the genesis of it. Just that I felt that there was a bit of a gap in not having kind of the aesthetics and the mindset fully synthesized with something that I think's really important for that, and that's integrating Bitcoin.
Yeah. What do you mean by the aesthetics movement? I've never really kind of heard it phrased that way.
Yeah, sure. So, well, the aesthetics movement actually, if we're going like all the way back for a second, it's got it roots in like the 1960s and 1970s bodybuilding culture in like Venice Beach, where you have Arnold and all those guys that were in the bodybuilding scene. But the modern aesthetics movement is really kind of credited to one guy, this guy named Aziz Abershan. It's spelled like Zyzz. He was one of the main kind of, or the first kind of bodybuilding accounts on YouTube that really blew up. And he passed away back in 2011 of cardiac arrest or some heart related condition. I forget exactly where it was. So he's kind of considered the godfather of the modern aesthetics movement in terms of like the revival piece. And so a lot of especially younger people, he's kind of like a folk legend in a lot of the bodybuilding spaces now. And so you're seeing kind of as more, especially millennials, but even more so like Gen Zers kind of return to tradition. One of the things that is really important with tradition is kind of getting our beauty back, right? So a lot of the things that have been taken away from us in the last 50 or so years are with the kind of the socialism, the Marxism, the communism. The goal is to take away the beauty, and so that like that's not just with, if you look at in the kind of the postmodernist, the building infrastructure. If you look at kind of how physically repulsive Antifa is, a lot of this is by design, because what they're trying to do is it's a demoralization campaign. So what the aesthetics movement is it's a response to that, and a lot of it is that we try to shine our light on their darkness, right? Because the sunlight's the best disinfectant, right? So when I think about the aesthetics movement, what I think about is all of the bad things of the last 30, 40, 50 years under fiat monetary system, under kind of like the cultural Marxism in the universities, that we're kind of like the aesthetics movement shines a light on that. It starts with bodybuilding, but it goes into kind of everything else along with it.
Yeah. And I never really heard bodybuilders being sort of equated with any sort of fighting a light or dark battle. My main thought when I think about bodybuilders is primarily like when I was in high school and college, guys trying to just work out, get better at sports, whatever, meet girls, get stronger, get sort of maybe a college scholarship, play sports or something, or just to just work out, whatever. But I never really associated with anything like that. What is bodybuilding? How has that really played a role in your life, and sort of what has your journey there been?
Yeah, sure. Great question. So I think for me, that's where it started, right? Get When I was started bodybuilding, I was, younger, and the world didn't look like a lot like it does today. So it was a lot of the things that you mentioned, just get stronger. I was, training a little bit for boxing at the time, things of that nature. So there was no spiritual element when I first started. And now, over a decade later, one of the things that, as we are coming on this really, really dark time in the world with kind of the Faucian takeover with COVID and things like that, and these other elements, it's become more of a spiritual journey. So if you look at kind of the bodybuilding movement on Twitter, you'll see there's a lot of kind of spiritual energy that is kind of discussed, illuminated in these discussions, because what we do is the body and the mind are so connected, right? So like the thing is, by becoming as good as we can physically, what it does is it sets kind of that, a mental, emotional, spiritual framework in such a way where we can win that way. So I think that's where the connection comes in from there.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I'm kind of curious why we're talking about like maybe bodybuilding Twitter. What is bodybuilding Twitter like, or self-improvement Twitter like?
Yeah, sure. So if you kind of go back to, the origins of it, it was probably, 2015, 2016, where it started with guys that were really just swapping kind of strategies on lifting, things like that. So a lot of it came from like probably the bodybuilding.com forums from back in the early 2010s, and it just kind of like morphed into to Twitter. But while that was going on, there was also a synthesis with the broader self-improvement space. So that is, raising your confidence level in young men, raising awareness about like low testosterone. People don't realize this, but like the testosterone piece, is something that like a lot of people did not know about at all. This was on the really fringes, say 5 years ago, and now it's kind of being discussed, right? Like the low T epidemic in men, and you're even seeing it in some mainstream articles. But that was a really, really fringe thing, and now really isolated to kind of the self-improvement sphere in 2016 and 2017 when some of these phenomenon emerged. So, and actually, the seed oil questions, right? That's something that also emerged on self-improvement Twitter 4 or 5 years ago. And so when I think of that, you think about guys like Ed Lattimore, guys like I mean, hell, if you want to take it really far back, before he got into politics, Mike Cernovich was one of the guys that was kind of leading the movement in the early 2010s with his blogs and stuff. He went off and did politics later on, and stuff like that. But in terms of one of the early leaders of it, you could definitely put him in that category. But yet, like that's like kind of the broad self-improvement space. I mean, some of the guys you see now are guys like Solbra, folks like that are kind of at the forefront of that movement now, and the characters have somewhat shifted, but ultimately it's about sovereignty, online income. It is about bodybuilding, but I think the bodybuilding is just kind of one piece of the broader self-improvement sphere.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you're bringing up a lot of subject areas that I'm not as familiar with as you are. I am having Ed Lattimore on the show in January, but maybe you could tell me a little bit more about the low T epidemic with testosterone.
Yeah, sure. Great question. And by the way, yeah, I can't wait to listen to your episode with Ed. He's one of the best leaders and thinkers in the space. Yeah, but just with the low T epidemic. So if you look at like the average testosterone level of a male, and actually just going back they actually like were in 2017, in July of 2017, they reduced the healthy testosterone range from, it was like 390 to 1050, and they put it back to like 270 because there were so many dudes that were coming in the 200-300s, which is just unheard of. That's the testosterone level of somebody in their 80s, right? That they change the normal scale to that. So like a lot of people don't know that, but in 2017 they actually set the scale back because like they would have to diagnose so many people like with low T. But just going back, so like the average testosterone level of a male today is 50% less than it was 20 years ago. 20 years ago, it's 50% less than it was in 1980, right? So right now, if you just, it was 4x higher 40 years ago. So the average male's testosterone was around like 1,000, I guess it's nanograms per deciliter, whatever the measurement is. And now it's right around 400, right? So, and it's absurdly low, right? So the downstream impacts of that are kind of catastrophic. It's your energy level is suppressed, your mood is suppressed, you have more trouble. I mean, depending on how low testosterone is, it becomes impossible to get erections. Like all of these different issues that you're going to have, and then it becomes a societal issue too, right? Because as people, more and more men become, or low testosterone, what it does is it makes it easier for the state to scare them, right? Because if you are low T, you're in a constant state of fear, panic, you're jittery. You can kind of see it in people's eyes as you walk by them. They'll look at the ground, they can't look you in the eye. So a lot of these things that you kind of see with, especially the younger generations, is almost always downstream of low T. And people think that this is by accident, but it's actually by design, because by having a lot of low T beta males, it makes society easier to fracture, easier to split, and more susceptible to falling for what we've seen the last 2 years, right? With kind of this Faucian Gates' dystopia.
What do you mean by design? When I think about what you're talking about, and I think also like what are the causes of I guess testosterone decreasing in men, and so like, I'm thinking like by design makes it sound like a very long-term project, very low time preference. But I'm also curious what's causing it over the short term or the last 10, 20, 30, 40 years for testosterone decline in men as well.
Yeah, sure. So just kind of starting with the causes, one of the or two of the biggest causes are seed oils in the food, right? So if you look at food, almost everything's made with, and you just like go to the ingredients. Canola oil or some sort of derivative is in almost everything. So you have to be really, really, really careful to, unless you're sourcing something from like a farm,
Right.
or it's packaged and you know exactly what's in it. There's a good chance it's going to have at least some trace of canola oil in it. And canola oil is effectively what it does is it eats away at your insides, like your esophagus and kind of your stomach lining. So that effectively makes it hard for your body to produce testosterone naturally because it's working so hard to get rid of that canola oil poison. So the other big factor is the xenoestrogens in the plastics, right? So a lot of plastics are made with like BPAs, right? So and those and xenoestrogens and those things will like seep into the water supply. And when you look at kind of those, and well, just going back to the water supply too, directly fluoride has been proven to reduce testosterone by approximately 40%. So if you're drinking tap water, depending on what jurisdiction you're in, you could be subjecting yourself to a 40% reduction in testosterone there. So those are the kind of the biggest cause of it. Well, and also I forgot, obviously pornography. That's because what that does is that it actually affects you on two layers. One, when you release semen, that obviously naturally reduces testosterone because it takes about 1/3 of your daily energy output to produce of your body to produce semen like that. So that energy, is just gone, right? Because your body thinks it needs to reproduce. Like that's biologically, mechanically how you're wired. But the other thing is porn rewires your brain in such a way that like it's this constant dopamine hit. So that also kind of tertiary fucks with your testosterone levels too. So I mean, I guess that's more than two things. That's like five things. But all those five factors are just massive in contributing to the testosterone epidemic today.
Right. There was a lot to unpack there. I mean, what do you make then of what is it? 75% of internet traffic is for porn?
Yeah, yeah, that sounds about right. That makes sense, right? And
Well, I don't know if I mean, maybe it makes sense. It sounds astounding. I mean, you and I are using the internet right now, and that means 6 other people are using it for porn or in some way. I don't know how the metric exactly works, but when you start thinking about it in terms of that framework, I mean, it's crazy how much porn traffic there is.
right, right. Yeah, I mean, I guess you'll have like, if one guy uploads, 400 hours of content, then maybe that's how it's
Mhm.
calculated in or something. But it's still an obscene number, regardless
Right.
of how it's calculated. It's an obscene number, and the I don't think it's by accident, right? Regardless of if it's 50%, 75%, even if it's 20%, like
Right.
really, like it's still a shit ton, right? So, and the fact that it's above zero is a problem, right? Like to me, the fact that it's above zero is an issue. So I
That
would
raises
just
an
say,
interesting question. Like one, I guess, what I think this brings us back to, like you said, it's not by accident. We're back to by design. I'm kind of curious what if you could expand on that. But I think there was another. I kind of forgot, but maybe we'll start there.
sure, yeah. So well, yeah, just kind of going back, where this really started was probably like the 1960s, right? With the birth control pill. So and this is how the breakdown of the family really started. You didn't necessarily see this maybe as much in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, but because the effects didn't come in until like that generation after. But with the birth control pill, what it did is it allowed for, I guess, casual sex to be kind of mainstreamed. It paved the way for that to happen. So when that's the case, obviously, naturally, the moral degradation is going to fall down from there. And it doesn't happen immediately, right? They knew that, right? The thing is, what you do is when you're trying to subvert a society, you don't do it all at once, right? The thing is, like, you can't just go in to like a culture and just flip everything on its head at once, because people just resist it, right? So what you do is you chip away little by little, and until you've taken everything. So right now, if you go to anywhere in the U.S., it doesn't look anything like it did 40 or 50 years ago. But it didn't happen all at once, right? They slowly and slowly chipped away, and people just kept giving ground here and there. It was small things here. Just let them do this. Just let them do that. And the same things they're doing with COVID, right? The COVID is an accelerated timeline, but it's the same things they're doing with COVID is what they did to kind of Western society at large. And that's how they were able to do it. They chipped away, right? There was the birth control pill. Then it was, the push for, women in the workplace, so they wouldn't, have kids, families, do all these things. But it didn't happen all at once. It happened in layers. And what they do is they wear you down. So it's just like, well, how can you just be against this? How can you just be against this? And it's just 5% here, 5% there. And by the time you realize that you wake up, it's 2021 and they've taken everything.
Right. Yeah. I kind of want to dig into a lot of that. I mean, how do you kind of framing up these forces that you're describing around hookup culture and starting a family? Do you feel that you're sort of going upstream here? I mean, back in the beginning of the conversation, it seemed like maybe with weightlifting, maybe it was to meet girls or something, and that doesn't sound like family building. What do you make of sort of what sort of the younger age group is dealing with right now in terms of these forces?
Yeah, sure. So when I look at it, right, but I just alluded to the birth control pill, right, and like the kind of quote unquote sexual revolution in the 1960s. But when I think of the forces that are anti-family, they're so numerous, right? If you look at the last 50 or so years, one of the ones is the university push, right? So, like, why would you send someone off to university, like especially like a female in their prime childbearing years, right? So like the prime childbearing years for females are 18ish to say mid-ish to maybe late 20s. So if you wanted to destroy a culture, what would you do? Send them off to university where they're barely learning anything, right? Like they're mainly going to get drunk, do and hook up culture. So by the time they leave university, in a lot of these cases, they have double-digit body counts, even higher in some cases. They're and with maybe a worthless degree in something like psychology or something, right? And they're 23, whatever, and then they go into the working field and they want to climb their way up the ladder, right? And it's dumb, right? Like there's nothing like noble about editing PowerPoints or whatever it is that you're doing in the working world, right? Like what's noble is like raising a family. So, but it's all by like why'd they do it? And people say it's not by design. Well, they let everybody get student loan debt. So to me, it is by design, because the reason that the number of people that went to college 50 or 60 years ago was like 10% of the population, and now it's like 80%. So to me, well, actually, just the data suggests that all this is by design.
How do you deal with sort of maybe the pushback around, what you're saying is toxic masculinity, or, women have fought hard for a lot of these advancements or achievements in the social, cultural, and educational and financial spheres or economic spheres. How do you kind of deal with that pushback?
Yeah, sure. So if you look at one of the things that I look at is the rates that women are on antidepressant and anti-anxiety drugs since 1980, and it's gone up faster than the Bitcoin price. If you look at like a kind of a chart of the women on antidepressants and anti-anxiety drugs since 1980, it's actually like looks just kind of like the Bitcoin chart since 2010. And it makes sense, because the thing is, who would be happy, in a high stress environment where you're working for a boss that doesn't care about you every day, like whether you're editing PowerPoints or, whatever kind of high stress thing you're doing. I work in finance, and I know it's not fun, right? The thing is, like, I do it to get a paycheck, but if you don't have to do it, why would you do it, right? So the things that a lot of people fought for, right, they weren't the women themselves that fought for it. It was a few loud actors that fought for these things, whereas most women were not most, but a lot of women were psyoped into believing that this is what's best for them, right? But it was a subversive thing. The women that are, at home, raising kids, doing all these things, which is, there's no more important job than raising kids, right? Like that's somehow dismissed, right? Like that's such an important thing. And with the women that are, by the time they're 30 have, multiple kids, they're really, really happy, right? The thing is, like, none of them are on antidepressants or anti-anxiety drugs. It's all the single women that got to that point that don't have any kids, that are, they climb the ladder, they're making, hundreds of thousands of dollars a year, but for nothing. It's hollow, it's empty, because you have no family to share that with. So what I would say to the equality or empowerment piece is that the result's been the exact opposite, right? And that's shown in the data of the kind of prescription drug use among especially white women.
Right. Yeah, interesting point you bring up. What about, like, along sort of maybe toxic masculinity, and maybe like sort of the notion of cyberbullying, even if it's to help people improve themselves? What is the soy boy meme? And I mean, we could dig into soy as well here, as just, but
Yeah, sure. So the soy boy meme, and you probably seen it in recent years. It kind of like the soy jack, the open mouth guy with the kind of the thin hairline, thin beard, what have you. I think that meme originated, I think, on 4chan in like 2017 or so. The idea of the soy boy meme is that, they're drinking Soylent, right? That's actually a thing that's produced in San Francisco, and they're eating foods that are kind of high in soy, lacking in real meat, real protein. So they eat the soy, and that contributes to all of these kind of feminine behaviors, right? Like white knighting, simping, because a lot of kind of like soy boys, right? They can't necessarily kind of compete in the sexual marketplace through traditional means, so they resort to kind of beta male tactics, right? Which is, male feminism, things like that, as opposed to more traditional mating strategies, because they have to. So when, like, I think we call out soy boys, we do it to say, hey, that's not even a long-term sexual strategy that's can win. Like you might get some sympathy sex out of it or something like that, but like that's about as much as you would ever get, and that's even very rare, right? So what we're saying is, hey, like, raise your testosterone, do the things you need to do, get in the gym, maybe join a fighting club, maybe start a business, all these things that will actually help you develop your confidence, raise your testosterone, so you are in a position to compete in the sexual marketplace and, find a wife, and then eventually be a leader of a household. So when, like, I don't think that's cyberbullying to me. I think it's just trying to help people. If you look at kind of football coaches, up until like very recently, when there's been all this political correctness, before that, like, that's exactly what they would do. Most coaches would get people to be better through, degrading them to some degree. That's just how that works, in my opinion.
Right. So, I mean, what do you think's going on right now? How does this all come down to the birth rate? And is this getting more extreme? Whatever we're getting at, in your opinion? And is there a resolution to this, or just get it continually worse?
Yeah, sure. So I think the birth rate is kind of the most interesting question, right? Because right now the domestic birth rate in the US is, I think, hovering between like 1.5 and 1.6. So it's below the replacement rate. The replacement rate's 2.2, I think, or maybe 2.1. So now what started as kind of these kind of covert measures to reduce the birth rate through, birth control, through sending, women to university and things like that, are now become kind of overt propaganda, right? Where you see that in the mainstream media, where they're encouraging young women and young men too, not to have kids, not to start families, and things like that. So do I think this gets better? Yes. Do I know what timeline it gets better on? No. I think Bitcoin's going to play a role here, right? The thing is, on a sound monetary system, right, the bankers can't steal our wealth anymore, right? So I think it vastly helps, but it might help two generations down, right? So this could be a 50, 60-year project before Bitcoin and, broadly the sovereign individuals restore the birth rate. So how do we get there before? I think we need to raise awareness about the kind of overt and covert subversive tactics of the ruling class to reduce the birth rate.
So when you say like the ruling class, are we referring to sort of America, or is this sort of a bigger thing?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's big in America, obviously, right? But I think it's going on throughout the world, right? There's if you look at kind of like, obviously, the propaganda from the World Economic Forum, from the IMF, from just the globalists in general. I think America is kind of the center point for it, just because it is still the preeminent Western power, even though that's waning. But it's still going. I mean, this is going on in Western Europe. It's even seeped its way into, traditional stronghold countries where they have traditional gender roles, like Latin America and stuff, because the force of the U.S. is so great that, like, it's exporting its culture. The only places that hasn't seeped in, it seems to be, are predominantly Islam countries, because they have such a strong faith and culture. And this isn't me like an endorsement of Islam. I'm just saying broadly that seems to be one of the places where it has not seeped in. That maybe parts of Asia as well.
Right. What I'm trying to get my mind around is, we've talked about some of these issues and sort of predominantly, I guess, from a male point of view, but I really see all these issues in summation affecting the family and the greater family, kind of what we're talking about, the birth rate. What do you mean by when I've heard you say, like, watch for anyone promoting division, sort of on social or racial or gender lines?
Yep. Great question. So one of the tactics of communism and Marxism is divide and conquer, right? So, and this goes back to if you look at kind of Pol Pot's propaganda minister, he talks about this. Stalin's propaganda minister talks about this. What they want to do is, while they are accruing power, before they finally seize power and they've taken everything, and they go to kind of what Stalin has done is the overt tactics. So the covert tactics are first always centered around divide and conquer, right? So it's to make the genders hate each other, and that's easy, right? So like when you can kind of make the genders hate each other, that's the easiest way to reduce the birth rate. And when you can cause these kind of racial divisions, what people fail to see is that a lot of the stuff that, if you're Black, white, Latino, Asian, whatever, they're doing it to your community as well, right? So like when, for instance, they put crack in the Black communities in the 1980s and 90s, they did the same thing to the white families in the 2000s and 2010s with heroin and Oxycontin. So the same, but what the thing is, what they did is that they're creating this kind of false war, like white versus Black, even though that's not even really a thing, right? That's completely contrived from the media. And the reason is to distract from the fact that they, what they're trying to do is break up the family. And the same thing with the gender wars, right? Like females, are worse off now than they were 40 years ago, just based on the data, right? But they're quote unquote empowered because they're, going around sleeping with as many dudes as possible until they're 28, 29, 30 years old, whatever. So that's kind of the divide and conquer tactics I'm thinking of. Whereas, in kind of serious functioning societies, you have construction in place that encourage the exact opposite, right? So when you look at kind of like maybe the Amish communities, I know people have referenced this. They encourage people to get married by early at latest mid-20s, start having kids right after, and there's a communal element to how they raise the family. So like everything that the West does, America does, they do the opposite, and that's how kind of functional societies work, right? That's how the United States functioned up until recent history, right? To some degree or another. There's broadly kind of some more individualism there, but broadly that like it functioned in such a way to optimize for reproduction and a nuclear family.
Right. Where do you see then like something like Black Lives Matter in the context of the conversation we're having?
Yeah, well, I mean, Black Lives Matter like is a subversive movement, right? So it's funded to, if you look at people that are kind of actually kind of Black nationalists, they don't support Black Lives Matter, right? Because it's a subversive movement to kind of usher in the kind of like the trans movement, right? So if you look at that, like the flags are like the trans flag and things like that. So it has nothing to do with Black lives. What it has to do with is being anti-white, right? So like that's it's just one more element to divide people on. But the thing is, part of what Black Lives Matter's mission statement is against the nuclear family. It's in their mission statement against the patriarchy. So people that are actually people like Malcolm X that were actually trying to have like a a powerful movement, regardless of what you think about them, or would have like they're 180 diametrically opposed to that, because what it is it's a fundamentally subversive movement, and like it on a surface level it's anti-white, but when you dig more into it, it's actually like anti Black family as well. So it's purely, I mean, it's CIA propaganda is all it is.
Right. Is all this a form of psychological warfare?
Yeah, I mean that's, I mean, like all of this is kind of psyops, right? The thing is, it's like one psyop after another. So what the thing is, what any kind of communist Marxist regime talks about, and you're probably familiar with this, is that like they just try to break people down, right? So the thing is, like they don't ever try to argue with the truth. What they do is they just break people down with lies and lies and lies, and their arguments are always, emotionally based, because people tend to think emotionally and not logically, right? So that's why I always say we're in a spiritual war, because the people on the other side, that are actually controlling the forces, right, the ruling class, are demons. And what they're trying, whether they're literal demons or not, beside the point. What they're trying to do is they are trying to subvert what is left of the entire country in terms of, the nuclear family, religion, all those things that we've alluded to. And they've been successful so far, but I think the reason that the propaganda is getting more overt is because more and more people are waking up.
Right. I do feel like I think we're going through the controlled demolition of America. It's interesting when you bring up a word like demons. I'm torn between whether there is a cabal, or this is just an incentive-based systems with terrible incentives and asymmetric power in the hands of a few.
Yeah, it's a really good point, right? Because it's a lot of times these things aren't necessarily binary. It's a little bit of both, right? So you have an incentive structure that's set up for the worst of both worlds outcome, and then you also have, especially with the banking families, a desire to kind of humiliate the population. So I do think it's both that you have going on, for sure.
Right. I do sense that humiliation in the form of the conflicting messages, the back and forth, the different set of rules, things of that nature. Do you think this is related to something like Operation Paperclip and World War II, and sort of the remnant of the Nazi program?
Yeah. So I think there's definitely an element of that. I would argue that there's also, right, just an element of kind of the communist and Marxist piece to it too. So that's to say that like the humiliation factor is like kind of with the climate change thing. I'll use this as an example, because like obviously like we know climate change isn't real, right? Like this is just, it's bullshit, right? Like the thing is, like the elites are buying houses on the waterfront property that they're saying is going underwater, right? Like that, like it's so overt, it's so in your face, right? They're flying to Davos on private jets, so like obviously they know climate change isn't real. But what they're trying to do is get you to stop eating meat, get you to pay more taxes to them. So I mean, this is where it becomes the overt humiliation piece, right? And sure, is it incentive based? Yeah, but it's also, in my opinion, just the fact that whether you call them the elites, the cabal, the banking families, are trying to humiliate the domestic population with these things that are just obscene and absurd. And so, like the Operation Paperclip, sure, I definitely think there's elements of that. Whether that's the only element, or whether there's kind of like more tertiary elements, I think it's probably a little bit of both. But I do think, again, the banking families have had a lot to do with all of this.
Right. Yeah, I could see that. Do you think sort of the ruling class or the banking families, do you think that they're all aligned, whether it's through incentives or they're sort of an homogenous group? Or do you think there's sort of competition between sort of these ruling elites?
Yeah, that's a good question, right? I'm guessing that there's probably competition between the elites. However, right now, when push comes to shove, they'll I mean, they're going to turn on us, or they as long right now, their goal seems to be fairly homogenous, right? And that's to do everything they can to effectively subvert their own citizens, right? And so, is there kind of intercompetition among the elites and feel like that World Economic Forum? Sure. To what degree, I have no idea, to be honest. But I'm sure there's some, intercompetition there. I just don't think that that's kind of the primary element at play.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying there, and I think it's neither here nor there at the end of the day. So I'd love to kind of bring up these 2 points that you've made on Twitter and maybe in Twitter Spaces as well. Democracy. I wonder. Well, I'll phrase it more as a question. What do you think of democracy? Do you think it was a good idea?
Yeah, so I think democracy is a terrible idea, and part of the reason, right? So, just fundamentally, I think it never works because people are always going to kind of vote for the lowest common denominator, right? So you have, you have the dumbest people voting, and eventually democracy, you vote yourself into some sort of totalitarian system. But like, if you are going to have democracy, I think it should be kind of like that there's at least some basic qualifications for it, right? Like, I don't like the idea of a democracy or a republic anyway. I think, you should have kind of like, sovereign jurisdiction. So, right, like localism and things like that. But to the extent that you are going to have, sovereign nations, democracy should be based on like one vote per household, that the leader of the household votes, and like you have to have children. That means you have a stake in the future society. Like there has to be some, basic qualifications for voting, like married with children, things like that. Even if you just had like those 2 things, I think you eliminate a lot of the problems, right? Like I think that's a dramatic improvement. Even if you just said, hey, 2 vote, like 1 vote per household, and you have to be married with children to vote. Like that alone cures a lot of the worst parts of democracy. But even then, I still don't like the idea of voting, because it's still kind of like evolves into tyranny, I think. But it's better than, the complete dumpster fire we have now, that's for sure.
Why do you think family should be one of the qualifications, or the qualification?
Yeah, sure. Well, so having kids, right, means you have a stake in the future, right? So people without kids have no stake in the future, at least not yet. So they shouldn't have any vote in what's going to happen in the future. The other piece, by having a successful, or at least a cohesive family, it shows some level of responsibility, right? So and voting should be a privilege, right? So the fact of the matter is, if you do have a kind of cohesive family unit, it shows that there's kind of some level of responsibility. Therefore, if you're going to make decisions for other people, that's what voting is. You're allowed to make decisions for other people. Then at the very base level, those 2 qualifications should be met. That you should have to have children, so you have a stake in the future, and you should have to be married, because it shows that you have some level of responsibility. And it might not be much, right? Like the thing is, you can be married and still be irresponsible, obviously, but these are just very, very basic qualifications.
At a base level, I kind of think I side with you. I think the democracy thing is maybe not working out. Maybe not working out, definitely for someone like me, because anyway, you come up with qualifications, no matter how good they are. I do empathize and sympathize with the people who wouldn't qualify for whatever reason. And I just don't want anyone voting on what I can and can't do, as long as I'm not infringing on their rights, I guess. The whole thing seems frustrating. But I kind of want to, like, why do you see people, college educated people with a 90 to 110 IQ as the single biggest threat to freedom?
Yeah, sure. Okay. Yeah. So I've talked about this a good bit. So the thing that makes that kind of IQ band so dangerous is because they believe that they're intelligent because they've been indoctrinated by the university system. And what they're largely doing, that 90 to 110 IQ band that went to university, especially in like, unless they went for like a hard science, like computer science or something. A lot of these people went for like psychology or economics or something. Nothing, not anything against those. I'm just saying that that's broadly where that IQ band goes. And they believe that they're really educated more so than people that didn't go to university or college. And the thing is, if you look at kind of like that, say like the average kind of like 80 IQer, right? A lot of those guys tend to think more on instinct, right? So like a lot of those guys are, anti-vaccine, anti-big government because they, they think more on heuristics, instincts. And so like they kind of implicitly know what's going on. And then the guy that's like 130 IQ plus tends to know like the game theory of this. So he knows where the everything kind of leads. He's kind of done out the math and how you're going to get to kind of like this Stalin era regime if this keeps up. So to me, when I think about the 90 and 110 IQers, they are the most dangerous for society because they're not only, it's Dunning-Kruger, right? They're not only not that intelligent, but they've been indoctrinated with this propaganda for, the whole time they were in the education system. And they think that they're smarter than everybody else because of it. But really what they're doing is they're just kind of regurgitating CIA talking points. So they are effectively the propaganda arm of the global intelligence agencies.
Right. Very interesting connections you draw there. I kind of want to turn a little bit to more of solution oriented, kind of aspect of what you bring, to the conversation here. So, you are AK raw egg nationalism on Twitter. So can we talk a little bit about like maybe your diet and why do raw eggs play such a large part in it?
Yeah, sure. So raw eggs are like kind of like one part of my diet. Like I'll sometimes have them raw. I'll sometimes cook them. Right. The thing is like raw eggs help because like overcooked eggs because like sometimes when you cook them, you cook out some of the nutrients. So like broadly, you absorb more nutrients, right, when you take the eggs in raw. And then if you assuming that the chickens are raised in a healthy manner, right? So you don't want to eat raw eggs from caged chickens because they carry trauma and that trauma passes on to you. But if you eat raw eggs that were pasture raised, chickens that were raised healthy in a good environment that weren't just sent to the slaughterhouse, right, and they had good lives, what it does is that it's an energy transference thing. So like that positive energy transfers onto you, and you can see it with the color of the egg because like the caged eggs are really discolored. They're like an office yellow, whereas like good pasture raised raw eggs are like almost an orange color. But it's not the raw eggs just like one piece of it, right? The thing is like anti-seed oils is a piece, right? Pro meat, obviously, you have guys on here that talk about the pro meat stuff, why it's so important, anti-sugar, like all of these things that are important about the diet, right? Things like I chose raw egg nationalism because I like I'll have raw eggs, but like that's like a 10% of it, right? Like the rest of it, anti-seed oils, all those things are important, like improving your diet because it improves your testosterone, but also it gives you kind of like that mental clarity and focus to kind of go on and like, especially like, when you think about like being self-sufficient, having a family, raise chickens, hopefully if you can have cows, like, we'll need to go back to the ways of our ancestors to really win this.
Yeah. I get what you're saying there by tradition. And I still have a bunch more questions. Can you go back to maybe the animal trauma and maybe elaborate on that? Because I think this is where you really connect, mind and matter, not mind over matter, but really get the synergy or sort of mind, body, and spirit building.
Yeah, sure. So this is really interesting, right? So when everything on the planet is just, energy can't be created or destroyed, right? It can only be transferred. And that's just, if you look at kind of the first and third law of thermodynamics, it just kind of underpins energy transfer. One of the interesting things is that energy transfer happens in human interactions, right? So you can leave a human interaction and you'll either feel negative, positive, or neutral, right? Because if it's a positive person, upbeat person, they're going to transfer positive energy, right? So, but if it's a negative person, you're going to leave that interaction with that negative energy. Well, the same is true in interspecies as well, right? So when we eat things that have been through a traumatic life, like chickens raised in cages and factory farming, we absorb that energy, right? We are, like, when people say you are what you eat, that's not just a metaphysical thing. It is a metaphysical thing. It is a spiritual thing, but it's also a physical thing, because you inherit the DNA of that animal, right? Like that DNA is going inside of you, and due to epigenetics, which is, your genes are constantly evolving and changing form, right? So like you have this static set of genes that you inherit, but if you look at more into epigenetics, diet, environment, all of these things that influence that. So when you eat, for instance, like a trauma-filled chicken egg, some of that trauma is going to be transferred into you, and it ever so slightly changes your genetic encoding, right? So that's what happens when you eat animals that have been raised in a not healthy manner, and why factory farming is so bad. That's why you need to go to a local farm as much as possible, animals that were raised in a positive way. And when you think about the circle of life, obviously, humans are at the top of the food chain, but that doesn't mean that we should treat animals poorly. In fact, the opposite. It's harmful to us if we do that. So we need to make sure that, like, when we are moving forward and we're building this new society, we have to get away from kind of like the factory farming tactics, and we need to go back to raising chickens in the pasture, raising cows that are fed a normal diet and not pumped with any antibiotics or hormones. So that's what I mean when I talk about like that energy transference and how it manifests in the food that we eat and how that affects kind of our epigenetic data.
Right. Yeah. And then so maybe how does that sort of relate to maybe, sort of sexual energy or hookup culture or is sexual market value a real thing?
Yeah, sure. So the sexual energy, right, as we alluded to kind of near the beginning of the podcast, what it is, to produce sperm takes about 1/3 of your daily energy output. Like if you release sperm like the previous day. So now it takes 28 days to fully replenish your sperm, right? So the sexual energy is also transferred, right? So if you are in a loving relationship with your wife, whatever, girlfriend, whatever, and you release it to the side of her, right? There's an energy transfer. So you are giving her sexual energy through your semen. She is giving you also sexual energy. So it's a positive exchange, right? It's a net positive exchange. So that's fine. When you are masturbating or looking at porn, what it is you are losing sexual energy for no reason whatsoever, right? So a piece of you is missing, and your most potent piece, actually, because sexual energy is your most potent piece. They say 1 drop of sperm is equal to like multiple pints of blood. I forget the exact number, but and slightly less bad than porn and masturbating, but still not good, is like hookup culture and one night stands, because you're still releasing sexual energy on something that's temporal, plastic, fake, like whatever. It's temporary in all likelihood. So it's not as bad as porn or masturbating, but it's also not near as good as being in a monogamous relationship, or at least some type of relationship, right? The further up the curve you go, the better. Marriage is the best, but there's kind of these things in between. Masturbating and porn's the worst. And then, like, obviously everything in between, it falls somewhere on that spectrum.
Wow. Yeah, it was really interesting the way you put that. I never thought about it that way. And one of maybe the last subjects I want to touch on is sort of autism awareness. And I'm looking. Oh, here it is on September 17th. And I think this is one of the tweets that really kind of put you on my radar. And I'm like, we need to talk. And you wrote, "Our autism isn't the bubble, it's the pin."
Yeah. So the autism thing's really cool, right? So forever growing up, like I knew I was like different and shit. Like it's kind of hard to get without like using the word autism. It's almost hard to define. I think it's like I knew I was on the spectrum to some degree, but I didn't have a word for that, right? And as I kind of dug more into it, as I became, like well into adulthood, I realized that it was autism, right? So one of the interesting things is that like being on the spectrum is like when I said that our autism is not the bubble, it's the pin. Well, if you look at kind of like autism rates the last 40 years, they've gone exponential. But what I think that people fail to account for is that we can kind of leverage and weaponize our autism because to make the world a better place and do all those things that we've talked about all episode, right? Like families, low time preference living. Because one of the things that autists are really good at is pattern recognition, right? So the thing is, while autists struggle a lot with kind of like social interactions, what we can do is kind of reverse engineer the kind of the social interactions that are necessary for like nuclear families for a sound society and figure out how to get there through our autism. So when you look at kind of an autism chart, like if you compare it from like 1980 to today and birth rates, it's gone literally like exponential, right? It's like more so even than like anything else, right? And whether it's like vaccines, whether it's like fluoride in the water, probably a combination of a lot of different factors, but like what it looks like a bubble, but what I think our autism is going to be from especially millennials and then kind of after us like Gen Z, it's going to be the pin. It's going to be the thing that helps to reset society because we can weaponize it and leverage it in such a way that we are going to restore kind of sound families, but we're not going back, right? We're going forward. So like everyone talks about like, oh, let's go back to like this time. Well, going back leads us to where we were today, right? So how do we think forward? That's why I always try to say like, let's think forward, and how do we get to a place where we never get to like the 2020s type again, right? We need to set up a society to where we don't come back to this ever again. Leaving the civilizational cycle entirely.
Yeah, I kind of the last thing I want to touch on. I mean, I really understand and appreciate what you said there. The last thing I want to touch on is sort of this self-improvement thing, and it's in some regards it maybe comes off a little like toxic, but I'll read a tweet where you wrote, "You should be 10 times harder on yourself than on anyone else." And so it's really, I think it's sort of just raw aggressive help, is I think what you're trying to get across. And I'm kind of curious maybe where well, one, I'm kind of curious what maybe Bitcoin has impacted your life, and how these things have come together, and what you make of this conversation right now that you've been a big part of, whether it's in Twitter spaces or online, and kind of whether it's mind, body, spirit, and now economics, currency, and money. What do you make of this conversation, and sort of did you ever see yourself playing this kind of role in a conversation like this?
Yeah, sure. Great question, right? So when I think about this, right, you have to be 10 times harder on yourself. Um, it comes back to this thing where it's like, don't come to clean out someone else's closet until your closet's clean, right? You see a lot of this, especially online. I think this amplifies it, where everyone's quick to kind of point out at everyone else's failures when their closet isn't clean. So my thing, what I try to do when I want to, point the finger, there's three pointing back at myself. If I'm pointing my finger at somebody else, there's three pointing back at myself. And what that means is that there's something that I didn't do in that situation. To like, if there's a social interaction that failed, if there's a business that didn't work, like, and I'm involved in it, it's partially my responsibility at least. And I don't need to focus on what the other person did wrong. I could do that, but then that's just absolving my own blame, and that doesn't improve the situation. What I should focus on is, okay, what did I do so that doesn't happen again? Because I will be in another interaction with somebody else, another business down the road, and I can either come with excuses about what happened last time, or I can come with solutions. And I can already tell you the guy that's going to be successful, because the guy that's going to come with solutions and figure out what he did wrong. Everyone fails, right? Everyone fails in business, in relationships. We all fail to some degree. But the thing that separates the winners from the losers is the people that actually acknowledge their failure and work to change it for the next time, and iterate and optimize until it works. And that's why you got to be 10 times harder on yourself than anyone else, because people are going to come and go, right? Relationships, business, like that stuff's going to come and go. That's temporal. But you got to be with yourself all the time. So that's why you got to be that hard on yourself. You can't be that hard on anybody else, because like okay, great. Like, let's say you're in something's wrong at work or whatever, and you want to blame the other guy. Okay, maybe it's his fault, but like, you're not going to work with him forever. That doesn't give you any solution. You find a solution, and the solution is within you.
Yeah. And another one of your tweets to build on that, are you where you want to be in life? If the answer is no, and you're not actively doing something today to change that, you'll probably never get there. When people really want something, they do whatever it takes. Otherwise, it's just a dream. And I'll follow that up with another one of your tweets that I might push back on, which is, once you get to about 26 to 28 years old, you pretty much know who's going to make it in life. And, I'll say, you continue on. Soys are usually wharfing down brunch, getting drunk, watching sports ball every weekend. Successful people are working on businesses, investing, training, body, mind, spirit, etc. And the only reason I'll push back there is, I think on the fiat standard, I think that juncture in life has gotten pushed back by about 10 years. And I've seen a lot of people who weren't doing much at 26, 28, who've turned it around at 38 and 40. And I've even seen people do incredible things at 28, 26, 28, and then do something else incredible at 38 and 40 that they didn't think they could do at 26 or 28. So I'll push back a little bit on that, but I get the gist of it.
Yeah, that makes sense, right? And the thing is, especially with like the universities and the fiat, it's hard to sort through all the psyops in life. So that's why it takes people kind of longer sometimes. But I would just say, regardless of what age you are, if you're at a point where you need to turn it around, just start today, right? Like that's all I would say. Start today. Don't wait for tomorrow.
Yep.
Whatever you're going to do, don't wait for New Year's resolution or anything. Do it today, because today's all you have.
Yeah, and I definitely recognize sort of the externalities in my 20s that I think caused me to sort of delay family building or settling down. I think a lot of it was around economics and just looking at sort of I think in the 60s and 70s, it used to take you about 1.5 to 2.5 times your salary to buy a house. And by the time I was in my 20s, I was around 4.5, 5x. I think now it's probably around 6.5, 7x. And that ratio has just a lot of pressure, I think, on younger people who are setting out, and it it leads to a higher time preference, because there's just less a possibility of controlling your future outcomes. I've really enjoyed this conversation, Mind Over Matter. A lot of these subjects that we broached on tonight, just not spoken about as much. And the only time I really see it, or not the only time I see, but in your spaces on Twitter, and your Twitter feed, you're bringing up these topics, and they're controversial, and and I think a lot of people kind of get triggered just even broaching them. So I really appreciate it. I hope we've covered everything that you were hoping to cover, and I'll definitely leave it to you for any final words, and let everyone know where they can find you.
Yeah, no, this has been a great conversation, Cedric. I think we covered pretty much everything. I think it's important to speak truth even when it's not popular, right? One of the things that I think we're doing is we're moving the needle, moving the Overton window to some degree. The kind of the seed oil conversation was one that was on the very fringes just 4 or 5 years ago, and now it's being discussed by health experts, quote unquote. I'm using air quotes there, but what I'm saying, it's we're forcing our way into the mainstream, and the same will soon be true of semen retention. So in 4 or 5 years, what seems like a fringe topic like semen retention is going to be at the forefront of the conversation around sexual health and sexual energy. So the thing is, right now, it just takes us kind of being the frontier and pushing these convos. So, we walk so other people can run, and eventually people can fly.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's really people, speak their truth. And I think even if your truth is wrong, it's interesting. A lot of times when I talk to friends and family about Bitcoin, and I get very, evangelical, and maybe it's overwhelming, and I say, hey, if I'm wrong, I would love you to put in a little bit of work. If you love me, and tell me how I'm wrong. Tell me what you think. Save me if I'm that far off base. I think it's great when people share how they feel with each other. I think preference falsification is a really prevalent thing in our society, and I think it's leading to a lot of bad outcomes. On seed oils, we had Texas Slim on the show, and I think that's a great show, and I think everyone should check that out if they haven't heard it. And my last question for you is: were you ever a normie?
Oh yeah, definitely. And I think, up and probably till 2016 or so, I was, right. So like for a long time in college, post college, I was, and I think 2016, 2017, I found Bitcoin in 2017, and even though I didn't really grasp it then, I was still kind of going down the rabbit hole, and then also kind of finding self-improvement Twitter around then. I think a lot of the great meme wars leading up to the 2016 election had an effect on me, right? So yeah, certainly, right. I'm not one of these guys that was raised in like a really base situation and things like that. In fact, like the opposite. Like I kind of I think I became kind of more of a dissident because of how I realized that everything for the first 27 years of my life was like a lie, right? So like I was angry about it, right? And so I'm trying to make it right and help. And now being older, right? I'm 31, so I try to, if young people come in and see somebody that was on the other side, like I don't want like people to go down the wrong rabbit hole for many years like I did. I would want, so when I talk to young people, I'm like, don't do that, do the opposite of this. And especially a lot of Zoomers are listening, right? So I think that like they're going down the right rabbit hole, and that gives me faith that we're going to turn this thing around. I think we're gonna win.
Yeah, man. I think so too. I'm optimistic. I love how they put it, the great meme wars. I do think that kind of sums up our times in a lot of ways. Thank you so much, Mind Over Matter. This has been so dope.
Awesome. Thanks a lot, Cedric.
Thank you. Mind Over Matter on Soul Over Flesh, right here on the Bitcoin Matrix podcast. And this episode was brought to you by Citadel Cabins, CypherSafe, Ledin, and the Bitcoin 2022 conference. Bitcoin 2022, the Bitcoin conference, is going to be Coachella for Bitcoiners, and I hope to see you there, and let's grab a beer. Use code BitcoinMatrix at checkout to get a 10% discount. Ledin.io is a secure, simple, and easy-to-use platform for managing and growing your digital wealth. If you want to see what it's all about and get $50 free in USDC when you take out your first Ledin loan, head over to start.ledin.io/Bitcoin Matrix. Citadel Cabins exists to help individuals achieve shelter, rest, security, and location independence. This is so important now that we're going deeper into madness. Head over to citadelcabins.com to fill out an application now. You bought a hardware wallet, right? So you take your Bitcoin security seriously. Now go that extra step and secure it from physical disaster with a CypherWheel seed storage device. Go to cyphersafe.io and use the code MATRIX for 10% off your order to keep your sats safe. And thank you for listening. Stack sats, stay humble, and I'll see you in the Bitcoin Matrix. This is Cedric. Peace.